Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I'm your host, George Blitch. And I just wrapped up an incredible conversation with Yia Vang. You guys may know him as a chef who owns his own restaurant, Vinai, as well as Union Hmong Kitchen that he's done in the Twin Cities area. You might know him as the host of Feral, who's put out 3 seasons of their show. And, we talked a little bit about all of that, a lot of history of the Hmong people and his family, and basically how he wrote the love letter to his parents through Vinai, his restaurant that's there in the Twin Cities. And really, we cover a lot of culture, a lot of history, a lot of family, so much richness, whether it's, meals that are cooked on the table or just the lore of all these stories and how all these things came to be in his life. And really, it's just, he has an incredible story. He's an incredible human, so humble, so kind. His heart is huge, and we really dove into some amazing conversations today. So listen, I don't want to go ahead and talk more on this introduction than I need to. I need you guys to make sure you listen to this episode, you share it, you check out the show notes, you go to those links, and if you get a chance to, go check out the restaurant in person because I know you'll love it. Thank you so much, Ia, for being so open and being so open to share all that you did today. It was really an honor to talk with you, and I know that the listeners are going to love it. So, you guys, without further ado, here is my interview with Chef Yia Vang. Enjoy. Hey, Yia, how you doing today, man?
What's up, George? How are you? Good, great, great. I'm doing well.
Good deal, man. I'm having a great day. Excited to talk to you. Listen, I know there's so much that we're going to cover today. Your restaurants, kind of your history in the, culinary scene. Obviously, your television show, Farrell. There's so much to cover. But with a lot of my guests, I'd like to kind of bring it back to the beginning. If you can kind of tell me a little bit about where you grew up. You got quite a story there, and it's definitely one I want to kind of dive into. And I think it helps paint the picture of, where you've gone with your, with your careers. And I just want to kind of go with there. So why don't you kind of tell people a little bit about where you grew up, and then we'll kind of thread the needle and kind of go from there if you don't mind.
Yeah, majority of growing up, like when I was younger, was out east actually, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So imagine a bunch of like, Southeast Asian Hmong kids, really small group growing up with Amish and Mennonite neighbors, So we had that. And then middle school, high school years, and even college is I'm a Wisconsin boy. So central Wisconsin, small podunk town. In our little town called Port Edwards was under in central Wisconsin was under I want to say we had what I think we had about 1,800 people, like a little bit under 2,000 people in our little small town. It was so small that it was actually called village. It wasn't even called town. And yeah, and so I kind of grew up there, and then ended up going to college at UW La Crosse. Being at college, it was amazing because that's where I kind of got I cooked growing up, it was like kind of a thing, but I really didn't want to cook as a professional. I thought this was just the job to get to my real big boy job one day, and so yeah, as you know, as you go to college, it's like yeah, I'll cook at this bar and grill place here and there, and then eventually I came up to the Twin Cities. My mom's side of the family is here in the Twin Cities, so I came up here after I was done with college. I thought I was going to save the world through nonprofits and wanting to go to grad school and try to save the world through that. And found out real quick, like, man, I just finished school. Why would I want to go to school again? And ended up the only places I could find to work was just restaurants. And then I just found myself back in the restaurant world. And it just, always made sense to me. And then, yeah, eventually from there on, we kind of were able to stem out a little bit, started a few pop-ups. And then again, we were just very blessed to have the right people, the right team around us that really supported us.
Well, I want to kind of go back too, because when you were born and raised in,
Yep.
obviously with your family there, but you were born in a refugee camp. And if you could maybe talk a
Oh
little
yeah.
bit about the history there, and maybe for folks who maybe don't know much about the Hmong culture and your indigenous
Yeah.
community, and kind of, I know some people are like, oh, where's that country? Well, it's not a country. It's,
Yeah.
it's obviously a tribal
Yeah.
people, and there's a lot of areas that are called
Hmm.
home, and which now there's, a
Yeah.
large gathering of folks there in that Minnesota, Twin Cities area. And I was kind of curious about your
Hmm.
trajectory and as far as
Hmm.
coming over to the U.S. with your family, and maybe a little bit of history of your family there, if you wouldn't mind kind of diving into that, because obviously the connectivity of your restaurant now, Vinai, and I'd love to kind of thread that needle if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so back in the 60s, the war in Southeast Asia started, and a lot of people know it as the Vietnam War. But what 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 is talked about in American history in the Vietnam War was kind of in southern Vietnam and all the stuff that was going on there. U.S. Troops were on the ground there. But what was while that was going on, there was actually a war in northern Laos. And right now, today, if you look it up, you Google it, it's literally called a secret war. It's called the secret war for a reason. And the fear was that the communists was coming in from the north, and they were coming through Laos. And so U.S. sent in advisors, CIA advisors slash special forces guys, and they came down there and they went to the mountains of Laos and they found this group of people called the Hmong people. That are my people, and they trained them. So it was, Dad talked about how there were special forces guys that would come in, and I'm talking like Green Beret guys that would come in, and they're, because the whole idea of the Green Beret is force multipliers, right? So their whole mentality is, we're going to bring in our guys, and the CIA caseworkers. They came in with their guys and said, we're going to train you. We're going to train the indigenous people here. We're gonna give you guys weapons. We're going to pay you guys, and basically you're mercenaries for us, and you're paramilitary troops, and we're going to train you in war tactics. Because here's the deal: at the end of the day, you guys are the guys that know this land, you know the terrain, you know how to. And I was talking to this Hmong researcher, and he said, when you read the old CIA files, and they what they wrote about the Hmong people was this: the two things that the CIA was very drawn to the Hmong people was, one, they knew the terrain really well because this was their home, the mountains of Laos, where all this fighting is going to happen. And two, because they lived in the mountains and because that they were always constantly moving, they had great cardio. So that it was just like they had good cardio and they knew the area. And that was one of the big things. And I think they also made a note that these are, as they call it, vicious fighters. The Hmong people were known to not have a quitting spirit. Some of the first Hmong pilots that were taught how to fly these, like, basically they were old World War II fighter planes. Some of them, well, you even say they even wrote, because I was reading the CIA case file, old case file that was released, is they said that the Hmong fighter pilots didn't know when to quit. So even if the plane was like all blown up, they wouldn't retreat. They would keep fighting until they were shot down, and they were losing too many Hmong pilots. And the aviation coaches would have to explain to them, if you get shot at, you have to come back. And they're like, well, no, we still have bullets. They kept saying, we still have bullets. We still have ammo. We're going to keep fighting until our last ammo. And that was what drew the CIA to the Hmong people, it's interesting because if you know our history is filled with war, a lot of fighting, for our own freedom, for our own for unity. And so when that happened, there was a handshake deal that was made between the Hmong leaders and the what is it, and the American government, and they said, no matter win, lose, or draw in this war, you'll have free citizenship to our country. And so a lot of the Hmong boys at that time joined up. My dad was 14 when he joined, 13 or 14 when he joined. And then after that, the fall of Saigon in 75, everything was taken down, everything was broken down. The U.S. pulled out, and then our people were left behind, and there was this great genocide of the communist troops came through and genocide our people. And they said on record they had about 300. There was about 300,000 Hmong people that were in the mountains, and after the genocide, after all the killings, about 60,000 Hmong people were killed from this genocide after the war and being left behind. So then these refugee camps were set up in Thailand by NGOs, and from 75 to 92, there was this refugee camp called Vinai, which our restaurant is named after. And so 75 to 92, Vinai hosted 90,000 refugees. Out of those 90,000, 90% of them were Hmong. Out of those 90% Hmong people that were there, majority ended up in the Midwest because of some of the incredible refugee relocation nonprofits that are here actually in the Twin Cities, backed up by a lot of the Methodist and Lutheran churches here in the Midwest. And so here in the Twin Cities, there are about 92,000 Hmong people in the metro. So it is the largest, most dense Hmong population in the country. In California, there's like 120,000 Hmong people, but they're spread through California, while here in the metro, there's about 92,000. And that was 2020 stats, on it. And kind of in a way, the Twin Cities is kind of known as like the Hmong capital, or this is our New York City. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere kind of mentality for Hmong culture, Hmong any kind of thing Hmong. A lot of it stems from here, or also Sacramento, California, Merced County in that area over there, Fresno. There's a big Hmong population there too. So those are the big two populations. We ended up here in the Midwest. There's a lot in Wisconsin, but it's all spread out in Wisconsin. And then I grew up here. At the end of the day, I'm a Hmong kid, grew up in a Hmong family, speak Hmong and English, but at the end of the day, I'm also a Midwest boy. I tell people, I'm a Midwest boy. I'm a Midwest boy, born, raised in Wisconsin mostly. Here also Minnesota. I love my cheese curds. I love my double cheese butter burgers. I love a good root beer float. Like at the end of the day, like I'm a Midwest boy, but at the end of the day too, I'm also a Hmong kid. Who loves going out, growing up fishing, hunting with my dad. And again, I think that mixed with being like the Midwest kid too, who's like, yeah, let's start fires in the back and let's grill our food and be a little country in a way where I drive a truck, I love it, and stuff like that. Once in a while, I'll listen to some country music, but I don't do it too loud because then I don't want people to judge me. But yeah, man, like at the end of the day, dude, I'm kind of hillbilly-ish. Like we put stuff together with duct tape and super glue. At the end of the day, we always, I don't think you and I are old enough to know the show MacGyver.
Oh
Richard
yeah.
Dean Anderson, MacGyver. Yeah, we always talked about the fact that when my dad was tinkering or putting things together, or he instead of MacGyver being MacGyver, he was always being MacGyver. So it's like, what's the MacGyver way of doing things? So we would always talk about that. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what I am. But at the end of the day, too, I am also, this 40-year-old dude who's very connected to our culture, and I, find myself that the vehicle or the canvas that we can use to paint, the picture that or tell our story is through our food. And so we've been a part of doing that for the last. We were very blessed for the last 7-8 years with Union Hmong Kitchen. Now we have another restaurant called Vinai. And we're able to do different things, and we've been very blessed in the last few years to be able to do different shows and stuff. So yeah.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit because I wanted to hear about, how the Union Kitchen started and the
Mm-hmm.
idea of, I think a lot of people maybe have this misnomer. It's like, oh, Hmong food is this. Well, you kind of talk about it's more like a philosophy. It's like there's
Mm-hmm.
a merging and an equalization of different flavors, and there's like a
Mm-hmm.
balance that's there,
Yeah.
and also the community spirit of coming together in something that you have shared, or maybe everyone kind of put a hand in it, whether it's the hunting or the fishing or the foraging, and what
Mm-hmm.
you kind of bring to the table. But there is certain things like you had, like, some of your recipes with your dad's sausage and your mom's hot sauce, which I want to know about. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
hot sauce connoisseur,
Yeah.
but I want to
Yeah.
hear like a little bit about when you started doing that and doing these pop-ups. What was it that you were featuring these ideas of
Mm-hmm.
these flavors and profiles, and what would be, I guess, is there a representation of kind of what is Hmong cuisine within, because I know you with those restraints where you kind of say, yeah, it's not, it's more philosophy based, but what was it that you were kind of cooking and preparing and sharing as,
Yeah.
here is Hmong dining when you first started that out? What did that look like?
Yeah. So it's kind of like telling a story, right? So you can't just jump into the middle of it. Imagine
Right.
going into a movie and you jump into at minute 45 or minute 50 and you're like, wait, who's the bad guy? Like who's the good guy? Like what's his deal? So right away you can't do that, especially when you do something with Hmong food, right? Hmong food has been under the umbrella of different kinds of food. Some of the first Hmong restaurant owners and food vendors that came here to the Twin Cities, they had to open under the umbrella of being a Chinese restaurant because that's what sold. People weren't coming in to understand Hmong food. People were coming in to say, "Hey, can I get my lunch for $5.99 plus an egg roll and a fortune cookie at the end?" And so I give props to those guys because they paved the way. Like, these are the people that did basically it was a Pan Asian restaurant where it's like you had Hmong, you had Thai, you had Vietnamese, and even people didn't know what Cambodian or Laotian was. But all of these food groups are very distinct because of the people behind it, and the people behind it are the stories behind the food. I believe that food is this. I call it progressive tradition. You look at tradition, right? There's like you growing up, you had family traditions within your family, or your mom and dad, or and then as you grew up and you had your own family, you took some of those family tradition, but you molded it to your own tradition of with your kids, your wife, whatever. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But for somebody to say, well, dude, those aren't real Christmas traditions because you're not doing it exactly the way that your parents are doing. But it's like, no, no, tradition progresses and then move, and we can glean from different traditions. So sometimes when people think of the word tradition, they're just like, it has to be like this. Like, right? We get that one that says, well, that's not traditional French food. My gosh, dude, are you really going to do that? Do you really want to eat traditional French food? Do you want to eat something that's steeped in cream that has no flavors and salt and pepper? Do you want to know traditional French food? They use tripe and innards and they braised it and then they made a sauce, and then they made a gravy and then you poured it over boiled potatoes. Nobody wants that. Now, when you talk about French food, what you're really thinking about when you're thinking French food is what you're really thinking about is what the French people would say, oh, this is a French food, but this is French food plus the 50 years that a French food that has come from this different tradition. That's any kind of food in general. Hmong food, Hmong people, our Hmong culture, for the first time in the last 100 some years, and probably I was thinking about 25, 30 years ago, we're starting to just develop as a culture. We're starting to find our footing. Did you know that the written Hmong language wasn't created until 1948? That's our written language. Before that, our language was an oral language. So you're telling me that Hmong food could be defined in this thing, but maybe 70 years ago, our language was finally just put in as a written language with the missionaries using English letters to be able to use the Hmong language as a written language. So if you know anything about culture, if you don't have a written language, your culture dies out as your elders die out because they're your historical archives. They're your backup hard drives. And imagine if you have a bunch of corrupted, broken hard drive, you have no idea what your past is. So you're always recreating something, always recreating something. Majority of our history is in our elders, and a lot of them have passed away. Recently, my mom and dad just sat down with my sister, and my sister, she's a counselor and therapist. So she's like, I talk to people every day about their story. I haven't really talked to dad about his story. So she literally on her phone for 4 hours recorded my dad's whole story of him being a boy, joining the war, fighting through the war, all the battles they were, and his whole story she recorded. And now we have it as a recorded video, which before that, he would just tell stories with his old army buddies, his old war buddies.
Right.
So that's very important. So I set that up to explain to you, as a culture, we're pretty young. So to say that we're starting defining Hmong food, it's like, no, let's just define our culture first before we can even define Hmong food. I believe that food in general is always progressive. It's always changing. Why? Because we're always rubbing shoulders with all these different cultures. That's what makes food so beautiful. So I would say that Hmong food, to understand Hmong food, you have to understand our people, because our food has our cultural DNA written into it. If you want to know our food, you got to know our people. If you know our people, you know our food, because our food actually tells the story of where our people have been, where they are, and where they're going. So the way that we do Hmong food here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota and Wisconsin is a little different than the Hmong people in Sacramento. They're a little different than Hmong people in Portland. They're a little different than the Hmong people in Boca Raton. They're a little different than the people in Little Rock, Arkansas. Why? Because the Hmong people, we are drawn to the region around us. We glean what the land can provide for us, because the growing season here is different than the Hmong people that live in Dallas, than the Hmong people that live in Houston. It's a little different, right? So that's going to change the way that we do our food. But one thing that does connect us, and this is why I say Hmong food is not actually about produce and product, but it's about the philosophy. Our philosophy is no matter where we go, we will use the living world to create food that just not only nourishes our body, but it's going to tell our story and it's going to rejuvenate our souls. That's what Hmong food really is about. We have to dig into the story when we dig into our food, right? There's the simplicity. There's a Hmong dish that's so Hmong, it's not even funny. It's 4 ingredients. And one of the ingredients is water. It's a braised dish. Like look, trust me, man, we ain't using any foam. We're not using some, sous vide immersion circulator. We're not using some, little driplets of whatever essence of pine or bull crap like that. We're not using any of that. Literally, it's a pot You have a bunch of pork neck bones. You have Hmong mustard greens, water, and some lemongrass, and you let it braise down, and you eat that over rice. And every Hmong kid, when I say that, if it's a Hmong kid listening, you know that flavor, man. You know the moment that that broth hits your lip, you know you're taking home. I don't care how old you are. Every Hmong kid has had that. Every Hmong kid that's born will always have that. You know, that's our food because that tells our story. A couple years ago, I got a chance to go back to Laos, and we were filming a show, and I got a chance to go back to. Actually, I went to the village where my grandparents are from, and my mom was born, and I got to stand in the what would have been the front lawn or the front porch. It's just a dirt path or dirt area there of their house where my mom was born and where their house was set up, and the trail that walked up to that front was still there, right? And this is like mom, it's been like 70 some years, and I'm standing there, and I'm standing on that dirt ground. I'm standing in this village, which some of the Hmong people have come back to, kind of, resettle that village many years ago. And I got a chance to cook with some of the Hmong folks up there. And they're still doing exactly the same way that they're cooking up there is exactly the same way that mom's cooking at home. I want to gather that. I want that to be a part of what we do. Now, here's the deal. Are they using Vitamix? Are they using a combi oven? Absolutely not, because we have the ability to do that.
Sure.
So for me, because we've had Hmong people says, well, you're not making Hmong food because you're not using the right cutting board or the right knives, or that's just me. That's stuff. That's nothing. But that's what I love about being Hmong, because the thing is, we don't have a country of our own, a flag of our own, an anthem of our own. But what we have is in our hearts, and you can't take that. Right. One of the things my father always said to us growing up, because we grew up in Pennsylvania, right? Not a lot of Hmong people. And I'm like, Mom, I was like, Dad, I remember one time we were outside working on something. Dad was like tinkering around. He was Hmong guyvering around. And I was like, hey, Dad, what happens when there's not Hmong people around? And he goes, no matter where you are in the world, if there's another Hmong person there, you will always have family, because that's what we are. When we see each other and we know that we're Hmong, we're connected, we're family. And that comes from this era of war-torn countries where at the end all you had was your people. And so so that's why I say all of this is encapsulated in our food. And so if you come in and if you want to just have good food, you're going to miss the whole story. If you want to come in and sit down and you want to understand why we're making the food the way that we are and how it's reflective of Midwest Hmong kids growing up in the Midwest, like then you'll be curious to hear the story and see these stories. And for me, it's a reflection of me growing up. So the way that mom and dad did their sauce, and the way that dad did, grilled his proteins or his meats, and he taught me how to grill over wood fire, might be different than another Hmong kid. But I've never said that this is the only way. I've never said that. I made it very clear that this is the way that I was raised and what I know. Vinai, our new restaurant here, I tell people it's a love letter to my mom and dad. It's not a love letter to the Hmong people. It's a love letter to my mom and dad. It's to them. And I make it very clear. And I say that with all due respect to my people. It's not a love letter to my people. It's a love letter to mom and dad. And you know what that means? That means it's going to be the things that they've taught and instilled inside of me. And we get to reflect it out to others.
Well, I was curious how, you end up translating that through, like in a restaurant setting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, how is it that you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of telling that story behind the food? And I guess we can pair this in with this idea too, is that a lot of the things that you're cooking come still from the hands of your family. I mean, you have the
Yeah.
family farm that's 8 to 10 acres, like,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of those things, like you talk seasonality wise, like whatever it's can grown there, it's kind of dealer's choice, right? It's like whatever is
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
is really thoroughly, able to go by season, that may be something you're incorporating
Mm-hmm.
in that dish. But I was kind of curious about that. How are you, aside from maybe some of those ingredients, how are you incorporating and kind of telling that story and enriching those meals through that kind of history?
Yeah. So, I would say probably about 4 years ago with this project started, COVID put a little pause to it, which I'm glad. And looking back on it, I'm glad that did happen for a couple of reasons. Really, through the COVID years, it really helped me figure out, hey, like, what is grit? Like, what are you going to do to get through this? Like, what's going to be like the punch in the face you're going to take, but keep moving? And I don't think if there wasn't COVID, I don't think that I would have had the strength to do it, because I saw the determination in my mom and dad's eyes when they said, I remember my mom grabbing my hand. I'm like, Mom, I don't think I'm going to do this. This is so dumb. Like, nothing's working. And she grabs my hand and she says, your father and I have been through war. I've seen family died. I've been through a prison camp. And this too shall pass, honey. We've been through so much and we made it. You will be able to do this. And it wasn't like, oh, yeah, so strong, you can do it. No, no, no. It was me, who my mom is this petite little, like barely 5 feet tall, Hmong grandma, and she had the strength of a lion. And it was like, can I glean some of that? That's what I mean when I say it's a love letter to my mom and
Yeah.
dad. That's
Well,
why I'm able to sit on these benches that I'm here. And you see the wall, the plaster, everything here is because they said, "Hey, look, we made it through here." And what I did was, I'm like, I'm gonna borrow a little bit of that from you to keep going, because at the end of the day, when it was really hard and when um, um, we were down money, and we couldn't figure out what the next steps were. When we were in that position, I mean, one of the big things that helped me was like my mom and dad saying, hey, like, let me tell you about what we've been through. Let me tell you about what happened with us. And when I heard that, it was like, oh, wow, like this is amazing. This is something where I found myself, driven to it, going, hey, like I want more of that. And that's what the testament of this place is. You know, I tell people it comes from them. It comes from, and I think that a lot of people are really cool about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like that's cool. Like, what does it mean to have this love letter with, from your mom and dad?" And I tell people, um, if you come into this restaurant, and so our architect literally took that letter and broke it down like 3 or 4 different pieces, and if you come into this restaurant, if there's 3 pieces in this restaurant that is drawn from that letter, and you tangibly see it, in the restaurant,
what are those?
the things. So one of them is there's a centerpiece where it's made out um, of cinder blocks, and it's funny because a lot of people come in, and from a design standpoint, a lot of people go, "Oh man, like texturally, like that's so cool." It's like very like you took the cinder blocks and you built out this piece, and but I did that. We did that. The architects, who worked with us, our team, did that because growing up, my father, all we had was these broken cinder blocks in the back of the house, and he turned it into this little grill, and that's where he taught me how to grill. And that around that grill was kind of, I didn't know this, but like 30 years ago, was kind of like this thing that made me very passionate about cooking over fire, not because it was some kind of trend, but because it was the way that I could stand by my father and the way that he just tended to that fire. And so there's this area that has a cinder block, and it takes up a big chunk of the middle. And from a logistical slash business standpoint, it probably takes up 2 or 3 extra table space that we could still use to make money off, to be completely honest. But this piece is so incredible because when my mom came in the first time she saw it, she's like, "Hey, that's what she drew to it without even telling her." The trestle on top, made out of wood. It looks like the ceilings in the old refugee homes that we grew up with. There's this wall. On the wall has this shelf, and all the shelf has all these old pictures from the refugee camp. Pictures of of us as kids in the refugee camp. On the back of the wall there is these tiles that has this texture on it, and the texture literally looks like the siding on the walls of the buildings that are, the little huts and homes that we grew up in the refugee camp. There is a flint, a black powder flint, old school flint gun that a friend of mine made. He took a little flint kind of vessel, and he created and he remade the stock and barrel, and it's some of the first Hmong flint black powder rifle. And it's one of the very first one where my father and my family, actually, when we opened the restaurant, they bought it as a gift for the restaurant, and it's what we used to hunt with. And when the French came in and asked the Hmong people to fight with the French in the 50s during the war, when the communists were coming in from the north and the French was occupied by France, the Hmong people didn't have any guns, so they used these, like basically they're little muskets. And you can still technically use that and put it, you got to know what you're doing. But
Right.
one of my buddies took it turkey hunting and shot a turkey with it. Yeah, but it's right there. The wood exposure. We used a lot of wood because my father, his first job in America when he came here, when we lived out in Pennsylvania, was he was a carpenter. So he worked with a Amish kitchen cabinet company, and he built. Dad didn't know how to read or write, but he can look at a table, reverse engineer in his head with a little string. He'll measure it out with a string, and then he can rebuild it for you. That's Dad. His hands, is what he uses. And so these pieces, they were all part of this letter I wrote. How I wrote how, like Dad, like that's where I learned how to grill, and like Mom, like it was, you taught me how to love courageously and ferociously, and so a lot of that is reflected in our vision, mission, values, and goals of our restaurant. Our foundational values are three words: moving forward together. And we have this foundational value line where it says always moving forward together. As a company, we're always saying we're always moving forward together. Anytime I feel stuck or stressed, I ask myself, well, okay, what we're doing here, is it moving us forward together? Well, that came from my father talking to me, going, I'm like, Dad, how'd you escape Laos? And he said, well, I had a compass. I was trained in the military, so I knew direction a little bit. I had a compass, and I know that we needed to go south. So I pointed south, and the whole village just followed me. And I had my rifle and I had my machete, and and they followed me into the jungle. And for months and months, we walked through the jungle. But I always knew that, and he explained this to me, and this is before we created our foundational values. He said, I knew that we always had to keep moving. Like you couldn't stop, because if you stop, the enemy found you. And how did we have to move? We had to move forward. You can't go backwards, because you have to keep moving forward. Sometimes it was a few inches, sometimes a few miles. And then he would say, then the next thing you did was we had to move forward together. And there were some people that were said, I can't go anymore. So they would stop. But for the greater of the group, sometimes you had to leave people behind, because some people just gave up. And that now is our foundational values to our company. Always moving forward together. And Dad, that's how he brought his people out. That's how he brought his family out of Laos. And that's how they got to Vinai, the refugee camp. And so that is the core of our restaurant. That is the core of our company.
That's
What we're
beautiful.
doing here, are we moving forward together? And sometimes, and you have companies, you work for companies, and you have companies. There are some people that are like, hey man, I'm just gonna sit here, I'm not going. And it's like, you know what, we would love for you to go with us, but if you're not part of what we're trying to do here, we're gonna have to keep moving forward. And it's not I'm against you, I think you're a bad person, not at all. At first, that's what I always thought, but it's like, no. For the greater of the value of what we're trying to do here. And so so that's what I mean when I say it's a love letter from mom and dad, or every little part of it. And the easy thing is, the food reflects them. Mom, all her hot sauces are here, all the peppers grown from all the vegetables, all the ferments, all this stuff, it's all from the restaurant. That's the easy stuff. But there's these little nuances into what we're doing here, all these little things that's happening, where if you come in and you're like, oh, that's a cool design, you see a cool design. But if you're curious enough and say, well, I want to know why it's like that, we'll sit here and we'll tell you the story.
That's beautiful, man. I love that you honor them and the history of your people in those ways, and continue to share that with all the people who come through. There's, I guess, it was something that I kind of thought about too. Like, I know the Hmong people, there was the word called Mia. It was like at one point it was a derogatory thing. It was the sons of the soil,
Mm.
right? And like it's something
Yeah.
that you and some people would look at that in a negative light, but you took that in something that's like you wear that with pride. And I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about that, and how you relate to that, and that's something that you kind of connect with.
Yeah. So if you trace the history of our people, um, about about you know 3,000, 4,000 years ago, excuse me, our people can be traced to what is now known as like southern China, in the foothills of the Yangtze River, the Yellow River. That's where there's like this beautiful fertile basin. Um, Anthropologists, archaeologists, they have found this, that the northern kingdom, at that time, China wasn't China. Like we didn't have the
Right.
drawing goes, oh, this is China. It was just land, right?
Land, right. Yeah.
And so that's like when I explained that, people are like, so you guys Chinese? Are like, no, because you have to understand, like China wasn't China. Like there was no boundaries. Like this is Russia. It was like, no, this is just land. There was no maps.
Indigenous people, different areas, right?
Absolutely. Like Montana was not Montana until like the government said this is the line for Montana. It was just land, right? And so So the northern kingdoms got together and said, the two northern kingdoms said, like, like the southern kingdom is going to outgrow us. So then they fought. They came united together. The northern kingdoms united together and took out the southern kingdom, and then took the southern kingdom and said, now you become our slaves. And those are the Hmong people. So even the Hmong last name, we have 18 last names, or they call the clans, the 18 clan. They gave us our names because it was a way of population control, because it's like Va or Vang, right? And the Hmong iteration is Va, Vang, my last name. Va means like a valley or a garden. Va, it's the garden. So that I could conjecture that my people, our clan, lived in a very fertile soil garden area, and that's why they were called Xiong or Zhongs. Xiong is bamboo; it means bamboo. So they probably lived in an area where there was a lot of bamboo. So does that make sense? So that's how they,
Yeah.
that's how they kind of labeled different groups, and because of that, there was 18 areas there. So and those 18 became the 18 clans, right, or the 18 tribal names, or whatever you want to call it. And so in doing this, the Chinese gave the Hmong people this name called Miao, which literally translates to sprouts. Which the reason why it's called Miao is sons of the soil. Like they're always outside, they're toiling. Because if you were rich and you were high esteem, you lived in the house, and the lower class people are the ones working the field. And and it was a derogatory term towards the people, like, oh, they're the Miao people. They're the less than. They're the people that work for us, And some of the Chinese people called our people the Miao people. We're known as the Miao people. I today firmly believe in what my father taught me was words don't define people. People can define words. And I firmly believe that. So we can either say, oh yeah, we trace our lineage back and we're just second class citizens and blah blah blah, like just lowly farm hands or whatever you want to call it. But I don't believe in that. I believe that our people are agricultural people, and regardless of where we went, regardless how tough the land is, and they're like, that's why we lived in the mountains of Laos, because the lowlanders didn't want us. So it's like, but we found a way. The Hmong people were some of the first people in history to learn how to cultivate rice in the mountains, because they had to do that. They're doing so well that the Chinese actually came to them and says, can you come to the lowlands and teach us how to do that? And so when I think of sons of the soil, I think of this idea of grit, hard work and grit. No matter how hard the land is, no matter how much they're going to tell us, hey, it's not going to work. Why would you? The soil sucks there, whatever. Our people will find a way. And I look at America as, when we first came to America, as this is the new land. So go work the land, go work the field. And one of the things, George, I've learned is that this isn't just a Hmong story.
Right.
This is a human story, dude. And so when I talk about that, we travel for Pharaoh, and I'm in, Podon, Oklahoma, and I'm talking to one of our guests about how when my parents came to this country, we brought to this country, it was we just worked, and Dad instilled in us what it meant to work. And then there's these beautiful moments where you can enjoy and you can be with family. Here's a Hmong kid born in a refugee camp in Thailand, living in Minnesota, and he's now in Oklahoma talking to a dude who's a noodler out there, noodling catfish. But this guy gets it too, because he's like, well, that's my grandparents' story. That's the hustle they went through, and I get that. So it's like this human connection, right?
Sure.
And so that's what I love doing. I think it's what we love doing with Hmong food. When we have our our Norwegian Swiss brothers and sisters, our white brothers and sisters that come and eat here, and they're like, especially the older folks, they're like, I don't know, I'm like, hey, at your house you eat, you have some kind of starch, you have some kind of meat, you have a sauce, and you have a vegetable, right? Yep, that's what we have here. We have some kind of protein. Our starch is rice. We have vegetables. Sometimes they're stewed, sometimes they're stir fried, sometimes they're grilled, and then we also have a hot sauce, some kind of hot sauce. It's yours is probably called ranch, but ours is a little different, but still same concept. It's food lube. It's kind of helps bring everything down. The moment people see that, they're like, oh, I get it. Yeah, it's not too different. There's actually commonality. That's why we say that food is a universal language we use to speak to each other. But we might season it different. We might grill it different. We might have it a little different technique. But those little differences, that's actually the cool nuances where we learn a little bit about each other. And so that's what I love about, when sometimes people look at our history and they go, well, we were lowlanders. We were highlanders. We were in the mountain people. We were dirty. Yeah, dude, I wear that as a badge of pride, man. Like statistically, we weren't supposed to make it. Statistically, we weren't supposed to amount to much. But because of our fathers and forefathers, our mothers and our foremothers, and the sacrifices they made, they gave us an opportunity. Don't waste this opportunity.
Well, and they like your parents even told you like opportunity is going to come and like be blessed in that. And like even when the
Mm-hmm.
chips were down and it looked like you were ready to give up, they were like, "Look, we've come here. We want to see our children
Mm-hmm.
succeed." And
Mm-hmm.
like the idea like you were talking about like your dad now sitting around with all of his
Mm-hmm.
grandchildren and
Yeah,
being able like that,
yeah,
is that not the
yeah,
definition of success, of being able to see those future
yeah.
generations thrive and
Mm-hmm.
continue to, merge with other cultures and
Mm-hmm.
share their histories. And
Mm-hmm.
with that, when you were talking about like your sister recording your dad, I
Mm-hmm.
used to travel around the world and interview indigenous elders with a guy named Harvey Arden who worked at National Geographic.
Mm-hmm.
And our goal was to try to sit down with the elders, preserve their stories for future
Mm-hmm.
generations in a digital form, which was,
Mm-hmm.
before there wasn't much. You could have it on old audio tapes or reels, but
Mm-hmm.
being
Mm-hmm.
able to have something we could record and almost share, not instantaneously, but, now in a day now you could live stream,
Yeah.
but, 20 years ago was a little bit different, but to put those things together as projects and kind of hold those for the future seven generations as we kind of viewed it, right? And I was curious as far as like that story of your dad's, and is it, beside making a movie MacGyver, is there anything that you kind of have this idea that you want to maybe have this work with those elders and share that? Is there any kind of thing? I know you're doing this with the food and the culture, but is there a movement there to maybe kind of share a little bit more of the Hmong story with people and kind of help preserve that? Because I think that's such an important thing, and maybe I'm
Mm-hmm.
just not aware of that in a mainstay, but I was
Yeah.
curious, is do you see that there's things where people are talking to elders and kind of preserving that these days?
Yeah, there's a few grants out, foundation stuff for people to do these projects, these recording these projects and stuff like that. But you know what I really would love to do? I would really love to bring non-Hmong producers, filmmakers in on it. Because I really learned that, especially within our own community, we're so like, and you get this, man, being a production guy, you can get so knit tight into your own community and everything. So you see anything through a very like guided lens, and you're like, okay, we got to do this because this is kind of. But I love bringing different cultures, different people from different backgrounds, and listening in. And there's all these perspectives. That's why our architect firm that put together this piece, it wasn't a Hmong architect firm. It was a Christian dean. It was they're incredible. But you know what they're really good at? They're good at seeing different perspectives from what I'm so used to. I'm a 40-year-old dude. I'm in this culture. This is my culture. This is my people. I'm so the problem too. The truth is, I'm in my own way sometimes because it's like, oh, okay, I want to get into this. I want to get into this story, and being so doing it that way, you forget all these little things. So then when we had Christian D and their team come in, they're like, that's so cool. Look at the way look at the way of the siding of that refugee hut, that refugee house that you guys grew up in. I think we have a tile that I worked with that looks like that. What if we put that tile in the back? And the moment they did that, I'm like, I would have never known that, right? My father taught me this, and my mom and dad, they both taught me this. And when I was such my dad always said, yeah, when you go out to the world, when we were kids, he would say, when you go out to the world, you're going to learn so many new ideas, so many great new ideas. Glean from it, learn from it, and bring it back to your people. It wasn't like, hey, just speak Hmong, only be Hmong, Hmong 100%, do or die Hmong. It wasn't that. It was like, no, 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 no. Our people are going to need our future generation, our kids, to go and learn the world. Dad always said, this is no longer our world. Your mom and I, this is not our world anymore. We left our world. This is your world. And Dad had this thing where he was super humble, and I learned so much from him. When Dad said, when we came to America, and by the time you were done with fifth grade, sixth grade, you are now the teacher and I'm the pupil. I will learn from you. And dude, man, you're talking about a freaking war hero. You're talking about a guy who commanded troops. You're talking about a guy who, stood alongside some of the biggest Hmong officials and fought in a war. You're talking about a guy who worked side by side with the CIA, right? And for him to look at his children and say, "You're smarter than me, and I am the pupil, and you're the teacher now. Please teach me. We're going to learn from you." Man, I was a kid. I was like, "Cool, Dad. Can I go play now?" But now as an adult myself, as like a 40-year-old dude who's like, man, like by the time my dad was like 25, he lived 4 lifetimes already. And I just thought to myself, yeah, like this is I owe it to them. I got to come back, and so that's why, for me, that's why it's super important. This whole thing is super important. And again, like I said, I always come back is the vessel I'm good at is food. That stuff makes sense to me, and so I'm not. So that yeah, so that kind of drives me really a lot. And as I think about my parents and the things they do, and even these stories that they have, and so when we're done with my mom or my dad, actually, my mom, we're gonna do my mom also. So
Wonderful.
my sister was like, hey, like I was gonna get mom's story. I'm like, that's awesome. Like let's do that. And so we're putting together. And again, I love to bring all these different people from different walks of life that aren't Hmong, because I want them to listen in and says, okay, what does it stir inside of you? You know, um, my mom says, I live for the day that our sons and daughters cannot cannot just only be leaders in our community, but leaders in the world. And that's really big where she says that she has this little mom like Hmong mom prayer group at church. And they said our biggest prayer of these Hmong moms and grandmas from all around the country, all around the world, they do like a FaceTime, prayer group. They have a little like prayer meeting once a week. And they said our biggest prayer as moms, grandmothers, daughters is that our sons and daughters will become leaders in our world, not just in our community. And it's you see these 70, 80-year-old grandmas who a bunch of them have been to the restaurant because they would come in. They're like, your mom, puts you on prayer requests for us, and we always been praying really hard that God will bless you. 80-year-old grandmas that I've never met before, that aunties that come in and they're like, we, she shows us your pictures, and every time, anywhere your show comes up, she puts it on YouTube for us to watch, and it's super adorable to know that there's these people out there that are saying like, son, we put our hope in the things that our sons and daughters are doing. One of the most incredible things, George, was a few months ago. There was a Hmong elder that my dad and my mom brought in for dinner, and they sat at the big table. And and I found out dad was talking to him, and I found out he comes up, and he was one of the original founders of the refugee camp Vinai. He was one of the guys who helped founded that camp. He was also one of the guys who helped name the camp Vinai Vinai. Vinai translated means virtue or virtuous. The reason they wanted the name Vinai Vinai was the original name is Ban Vinai. Ban just means village of, Ban Vinai was they wanted this idea that this village was a place for refugees to come in, people that are broken from home, lost family, and instead of virtuous, they saw it as the word in integrity. They saw it as this word of honor. They wanted this place to be called the village of honor, the village of virtue, the village of integrity, where people can redeem and reclaim that lost spirit. That's why they named Vinai Vinai. And we didn't know that when we opened this restaurant. We didn't know that when
Until
we
that
named it
dinner?
Vinai. Until that dinner, yeah.
Whoa.
All I knew was Vinai meant virtuous. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, yeah, it's like happy place. And even my parents didn't really know that until the elder explained that to me. And he said that was the reason why we named that. A small group of us decided to name it that because we wanted to be a symbol, a beacon, where people can come in lost, out from the cold, and come in and restore a little piece of themselves. Without knowing that is the vision, mission, values, and goals of our restaurant. Without even knowing that, like, does that make sense? Like this is
Yeah.
like one of those like
Yeah.
really like serendipitous moment. I'm like, wait, we didn't know that because 4 years ago, the idea was to create a place where community is number one and good food happens to be the byproduct of it. That
It's
was
the
it.
conduit, right?
Yes. I didn't meet this gentleman, this elder, and he at the end he's like, in his late 80s, and he shakes my hand and he hugs me and he said, son, it's very good to see our sons and daughters doing amazing things in this world. And I mean, I'm talking about a dude that was like 50 some years ago, with another bunch of people and say, hey, look, we have this little plot of land. Can we use this as a place to rebuild our people? And now he gets to eat. And then this is no pat on our back. Like, please hear me on this. This is not me going, look, you're doing a great job. I don't give a turd about that.
Right.
This is us saying we get to keep carrying the torch that was lit a long time ago. And so he's sitting in this restaurant and he looks around and he says, because we've been very blessed. Like we're always booked out like 5 to 6 weeks ahead, right? And he's like, there's so many people here. And he's like, these people don't look like us. So it was a lot of like, I'll be honest, there's a lot of white people here. And he's just like, this is, to me, he's like, and these old eyes, he said, these old eyes have seen such a glorious thing. And he just saw all the monk food that was coming out to all the tables, the place was packed, and so it was just in this moment where we're like, whoa, we're doing something here that we didn't expect this. So when people go, hey, what's next? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't. But we're going to keep following the path. We're going to keep following the way that the pathway that was set up for us. We're going to keep following. We always say that we stand on the shoulders of giants. That these are the pathfinders. These are the ones who paved the way, and I'm merely the dude that gets to kind of follow their footsteps.
Well, you're carrying on that spirit, man. And even when you don't know exactly everything, it
Yeah,
pans out, and
yeah.
it's those moments, man. I can only imagine what that must have been like for you and for your folks to be sitting there and hearing that. I mean, what a huge, epiphany of sorts, and also
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm right where I'm supposed to be, and we're doing the thing we're supposed to be doing.
One of the most beautiful thing was like, they had the big table, so there's like 12 of them, and my dad and the Hmong elder, he was the Hmong elder. He was a former high ranking officer in the SGU, the Special Guerrilla Unit. That's where the paramilitary troop Hmong fighters were. He was a pretty high officer. My dad would always say he's more mid level. My dad was like he's like a lieutenant, like equivalent to like a lieutenant. He was like, I was more like middle management, like I got bosses that yelled at me and I had to go tell the young guys. So he's like, I'm middle management. That's what dad said. And it was so incredible to see these two old war fighters, right? Sitting beside each other, eating a pork chop, eating sticky rice together. And they're sitting beside each other and they're just talking. And to me, I'm like, it reminded me so much of the movie Band of Brothers, or the TV show, where you have these, like, where we're like, I saw this moment where dad and this elder, these old war fighters that were telling old stories, and dad had his photos up, the photos, I have photos of my dad up with him being a young soldier, and he's standing with all these guys, and dad's telling a story of like, oh yeah, like that guy, like, that's my cousin, he died at this area because of a lion mine, and they were just talking, right? Like two old warfighters, these guys who battled hard, right? Friggin' never thought that they'd leave the jungles of Laos. And in 2024, 2025, they're sitting at a table in Northeast Minneapolis, eating this dinner surrounded by like 100 and, ish people eating in this crowded little restaurant. And I just thought to myself, like, man, this is so cool. Like, for me, to be able to see that, and for me to be able to it, I kind of had this scene. I'm kind of very like, I love movies, especially war movies, and just, yeah, I'm a dude, I guess.
Yep.
And it's just like these two old samurais. We have no more battles to fight, and they fought loyal for their shogun. They fought for the emperor. And they did their battles, and they're wounded and they're scarred, but they get to be the very few that are blessed to be old and see their grandchildren, and the dad's got a great grandchild. You know what I'm saying? Like, they got to see that, and a lot of their dudes didn't make it out. A lot of their dudes died young. Some stuff happened to a lot of the dudes, and I just see them with their sword, where it's like melted together, where it's like they're never gonna have to draw their swords again. They're just sitting there and they're telling stories, and they're about the battles they fought and the freedom that they get to live in. Dude, I don't care, man. Like, you don't have to be Hmong to understand that, right? That's why, like, for me, like, I don't care where all the political stuff is, but when I see troops or soldiers coming home, like my brother's a military guy, he was in the military, went over to Iraq, and when I see these guys, I'm like, yeah, man, Call of Duty, you go in, you do what you do. you don't get to make the decision if this is like, oh, is this the right thing or the wrong thing there? Like, some people who do that, I'm like, nah, man. Like, I learned that freedom isn't free.
Hmm.
You might not have paid for it, but somebody paid for it. And I'm constantly reminded of that. And when that moment I saw those two old war fighters sitting by each other, just eating. And what's really interesting about my parents is when they come to the restaurant, my aunt too, she's so sweet. She'll like come up to the pass and she'll help like try to like serve. And I'm like, sit down. We have servers. and and what's really cool about that is just because it's in their nature to always constantly serve, right? That's what they know. And so my aunt will come up and she'll sometimes like a little sweep the floor. I'm like, what are you doing? Don't do that. Like, I was like, I'm paying some dude to do that. Okay, stop taking his job. And they sit down. And I remember the first time we had our soft opening and my parents were here with all their friends. In a way, they freaked out because they didn't know. They're like, wait, they're like, people are bringing food to us. Like, what do we do? Like, this is the moment we actually go get up and make sure everyone's water is filled. And it's
Right.
like, and for the first time, they didn't have to do that. Somebody did that for them. And so that was so cool to see that. And again, like that was really, it was a very special moment. And our whole team understood it. Our servers, they're like, dude, wait, what? And, I got a chance to meet I just call her my great aunt. She was here and she said, she's in her 80s and she, held my hand and she said, yeah, my father named you. My father gave you your name. He's considered my great uncle. And I'm like, really? He's, yeah. He was like, you were named after my brother. My brother uh, was killed during the war. He died as a boy, and my dad really missed him. And when you were born, your father, who my dad like was very close to my dad, your father came up here and said, "Hey, please name him." And so you're named after my brother because my dad wanted a life for my brother, but he died. And I just want you to know, again, I never knew that. She came in and had it, and that changed me, dude. It changed me,
Yeah.
and that was like what 4 months ago, like yeah, 4 months ago. That changed me a lot, knowing that your life is not your own, and that like her dad, my great uncle said, "Hey, I want to give you my son's name because I hope that whatever." And you're kids, so you get this. Like I hope that whatever ambition I have for my son, even though he died as a boy, it will be passed to you. And even if he hasn't, even if he doesn't get that life, I hope that your life, in a way, um, becomes something where because her dad's passed a while ago, and he's like, so there was that hope that our son's name will be carried on. Man, I don't know, dude. That So when people go, "Oh man, how's it feel to be nominated for James Beard?" Blah, 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 I'm like, that stuff means nothing to me compared to the people that have been coming into the restaurant, sitting down, and says because of Vinai. You know, another story about Vinai. A few months ago, we were on the New York Times Best 50 list, right? And my mom, I bless my parents, dude. Like my mom and dad, like they're like dorky grandparents who like don't understand pop culture or the current world, whatever. So my mom kept telling her friends at church, like, "Oh yeah, there's a nice newspaper in New York that thinks like, yeah, you guys restaurant's really nice." And I'm like, it's adorable to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the New York Times. It's like this is like a little newspaper.
Little
But
tiny
but
one. Yeah.
she's as yeah, she's as happy. She's as happy as if like the Northeast like Light Tower newsletter here says we're the best restaurant. She's as excited as that or the New York Times, right? And that's the genuine authenticity of mom, right? And one of her friends, who's a very highly educated professional woman, said the New York Times is like kind of a big deal. To my mom. And my mom called me. She's like, I apologize. And she kept saying, I'm so sorry for just doing. She said, I'm really dumb. I don't know these things. And I'm like, Mom, you know what I'm saying, bro? Like, I'm like, it's okay. And my mother said, I need to tell you a story. When we were in Vinai, I wasn't in good shape. I wasn't in my heart was really broken. I was very depressed. And every morning I would wake up in the morning and I pray to God that God would let me die. Like, why didn't he let me die out in the fields with my family? Some of my family was killed. And I'm like, I'm like, I was so poor. We were so hungry. We were in prison camps. And when we got to Vinai, I was just very depressed. And when we left Vinai, I never wanted to hear that name again because it just brought back pain in my heart. And she said, I never wanted to hear that name again. And she said that in the last few months, when people come to me at church or people come to me and they're so proud of Vinai, the restaurant, and now to hear that this newspaper that the world gets to see, they get to see the word Vinai. When I think of Vinai, I don't think of sorrow and pain anymore. I think of hope. And she's like, you changed that name for me. Uh, I don't know, man. Again, this was never the intention. I didn't know what the path was, but to hear your own mother come back, the person who gave you life, the person who gave up everything for you, to say you've changed me, a 70-some-year-old, and for her to be humble enough to say my own life has changed, that all this stuff. Because at the end of the day, George, we start a fire and we cook chicken and pork on it. We braise vegetables. We have carrots and turnips, and we make hot sauce, and we bake sticky rice, and we put it in front of people. Because but if that's what it's about, then we miss the whole point. We miss the whole point because it's more than that, and that's what we get excited about when we talk about Vinai. Like if people want to come here and they just want to critique the food and they want to critique the service, sure, go ahead. At the end of the day, we're a restaurant, and we have to be accountable to that. Sure. But if you want to come here and be a little bit curious and understand what's going on and just get a glimpse and be like almost like a fly in the wall to understand some of these stories, it's going to take a little bit of effort. And those who desire to have that little effort, they leave a little bit more filled, right? Just more than food. And so that's why we say that we first start with the community here, our staff. We build our community. So then trickles down to the community of the diners and the guests. And then when the guests leave and our diners leave, maybe they go back and knock on their neighbor's door and said, look, I had this great experience in this community. Yeah, I want to share that community with you. So can you come over to my house for dinner? They don't have to necessarily bring them here to Vinai. Because something sparked inside them, I want to get to know my neighbors more. I want to get to know my Latino neighbors. I want to get to know my Somalian neighbors. I want to get to know my East African neighbors. I want to get to know my white neighbors as a Somalian diner, because there's a sense of community that can be brought around food. And I want to share a little bit of our food because in our food is a little bit of a story of our people and our family. That is the quote unquote secret of Vinai. That is what we're striving for. And good food happens to be the byproduct of it.
Wow, man. Thank you so much for sharing those stories and kind of enlightening to so much of the spirit of your restaurant and
Mhm.
all that came to. I know we're kind of coming in on a close. I think we've really set the stage there for people to understand. And I'll have you kind of give, the location where people can come in and see this and experience this in their own. But I also want to make sure I let listeners know a little bit about Farrell.
Mhm.
And so if we can just spend maybe a few minutes, we can
Yeah.
just talk about,
Yeah.
what it is in and of itself. And I mean, we could talk on that for an hour or two as well, but
Yeah.
I would love I feel like I'd be amiss if I didn't, at
Yeah.
least have you share a little bit about that and how that came about and what kind of the goals are there and maybe how that connects with all the other things you're
Mhm.
doing, if you won't mind.
So, yeah. So, man, a few years ago, a producer came up to me and said, hey, I have an idea. It's kind of out there, but there's a show I want to do. It's called Feral. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to travel the country, find invasive animals or animals that are destructive to the ecosystem or animals that most people won't eat, and we're going to go find a guide. You're going to go out there. We're going to hunt it. We're going to catch it, kill it, and then we're going to grill it, and then we're going to eat together with the guide. And I was like, oh, it sounds awesome. You know what? It also sounds so Hmong. It's not even funny. Where I'm like, dude, that's called a Saturday with my uncles, like what? We're gonna go out there and there's like, squirrels, sure, whatever, or or iguanas, okay, whatever, and so I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Outdoor picked it up, and then we started filming, and it was cool. We get to travel across the country, meet a bunch of different people from different walks of life. One of the greatest things is that a lot of them have never heard of Hmong people. From the Everglades to the Grand Tetons to Central Texas, to all around, even Minnesota, going up to northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, everywhere, And so what we did was, I loved it because it wasn't just a hunting show, right? That's kind of that's the canvas for it.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a show about connecting over hunting and food. And what was incredible was when I met with a lot of these guides, a lot of these hunters, a lot of them talked about preservation, about land preservation, and a lot of them focused on this idea that, hey, this is like, we went pheasant hunting once, and pheasant's not necessarily invasive, but we wanted to feature what it means to really take care of these prairie lands, and why this is important. When you start digging into that, it's all about how can we do our part now so that the next generation has something for them. That's Hmong. That's totally in our Hmong philosophy. What does one generation have to sacrifice or preserve that the next generation can take, and then they preserve or sacrifice? So the next generation, any hunter knows why it's very important to have land that's not touched and not developed on. Any hunter knows this is good land to hunt. Hunting is actually hunting outdoors, fishing, whatever you want to call it. Even like just say going out and camping and cooking outside. There's something elemental within our human souls that rejuvenates and revives, and that's when we do that. It's so much to the point that people are so willing to go out to the outdoors that they're saying, we're going to create these great vehicles that are basically hotels on wheel and park it in the middle of nowhere and still, in a way, have a little luxury, but feel like we're in the outdoors. And that's what I love about being outdoors. That's what I love about hunting. That's what I love about even like ice fishing, as much as people, whatever. Man, the silence on the ice, you have a grill going, you have these little holes with tip ups in it, and it's just you in a brisk wind, and maybe a few brats and burgers on the grill, So that's incredible. There's just something about our soul that quiets our soul, which I love. And that is so Hmong and part of our philosophy and what we do in our culture, that I was like, yeah, this makes complete sense. Now, some people, if you look at the show as oh yeah, there's a fun, like, haha, like, what the heck, pythons, what? Sure, there's that entertainment of that, but there's also this cultural side too, where we get to talk about. I got a chance to go hunt iguana with this gentleman down in Florida, and when I was telling Dad, "Hey, Dad, we're gonna go hunt iguanas," he goes, "Oh my gosh, like, yeah, we as a little boy we hunt those all the time." Let me tell you how we cooked it. So I got to cook the same recipe that was 60 years ago that Dad would cook in the mountains of Laos in Florida with this gentleman with iguana, because it was the same thing that they did. How cool is that, right? Like, my dad didn't have old baseball glove to pass to me, or he didn't have like a bat, or he didn't, whatever. Like, where a lot of fathers have these things, or a work boot that he passed down. But he had this recipe for iguanas and lizards that, as a little boy, they would hunt with this little musket in the, this little, black powder musket in the jungle, and they get it and they bring it home, and this is how they would make it, and they turn it into this little stew, and they eat it with little sticky rice and a little bit of rice. I got a chance to do that in Florida. Like, that's so cool, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why the show is incredible. The show is so fun, and you learn so much. You dive so much. I got a chance to go to Taos Pueblo, where we were with the indigenous Taos Pueblo people, and we were on ancestral land, 150,000 acres of their land, and we went out prairie dog hunting and learning from the elders. And I got a chance to talk to the elders about the Hmong people. And one of the elders looked at me and said, "You know what? I've heard about your people. Your people and my people are very much alike." And I'm like, "Yes, sir." And I'm like, "Because we believe that you glean from the land. The Hmong philosophy is if you take care of the land, you protect the land will take care of you and will protect you back." And I said that to the elder from the tribal elder, and he said, "We believe that too, son." And he says, "Our people and your people, we align so much." Again, an indigenous group in New Mexico, and then a people group in the mountains of Laos, literally across the world, and have the same vision of life, the same philosophy. How incredible is that? And that's why that show is so cool, and that's why we love. That's why I love that show.
Man, it is phenomenal. You just had season 3 air in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
I assume there's a season 4 coming down the pike. Is that is there production and talks about that at the moment? That's
dude, that's beyond my pay grade.
Fair enough.
I told people I'm a cook, dude. I just whenever get the call from the producers, that's above my pay grade. I love it. Another show we do for PBS here is called Relish, where we get to, where it's more kind of local based here in Minnesota. I get to go to all these different cooks and chefs' house and learn dishes from them, but all walks of life, from all cultures, and that one's like really, really fun. learning regional food from like the Iron Ranges in northern Minnesota, making pasties and potitsa and all that stuff, which is like very, Hungarian, Ukrainian style, from all the way from there to, to different like a Cambodian family, making Cambodian egg rolls and stuff. So we get to do that show too, which is called Relish, which is really, really, really fun. We're like just finished season 5
Hmm.
filming on that, and so yeah, man, everything that we get to do, it's about using food as that universal language, and I love doing that because one of the things we get to do is then we get to kind of draw people into the restaurants where people get excited and say, "Hey, we want to come." We actually even have a few people who were fans of Farrell that are from out of town, from Colorado, or I was in Texas and I saw this and I saw you guys have a restaurant here and they ended up here, so that's really, really cool. We got a chance to hang out with the meat eater guys
Hmm.
out now, and got a chance to do a podcast with Marnella and those guys. And, some of those guys have, they hunt around this area or around the
Yeah.
Wisconsin area.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
some of them have called, or when they have conventions or whatever, some of those guys from out there, they'll call up and be, hey, we want to stop by, so it's been so super cool to get people from all walks of life, from everywhere, we were down at Farrell. We shot with Broken Arrow Ranch in
Hmm.
central Texas there, and with those guys, and we actually get the wild boar from them that we use at the restaurant to make our Hmong sausage, which the wild boar is the closest to the original wild hogs that were used in the mountains of Laos to make some of the first Hmong sausages up there. And so, in honor of my father, we use the wild boar here, which is from Central Texas, and you're a Texas boy, you know all about
Yeah.
wild
Yeah.
boars, to make our Hmong sausage here. And so that's like really cool, like to be able to connect with all these different people on the show and still see how we reflect a little bit of them here at the restaurant. We're looking into some of the wild game meats that we can be using here. What would it look like? And so that's been really awesome.
Well, man, I'm so excited to kind of see what comes next, and what Spirit
Mhm.
kind of provides in that. It's
Yeah.
incredible. I really appreciate you sharing everything you did today. And for those who are kind of wanting to follow the journey, check
Mhm.
out the restaurant. Check out Farrell, and as well as your other show you just mentioned as well, Relish. Where are some of the spots that people can go and kind of follow along
Mhm.
in this journey?
Yeah, so Relish, they put up all our streaming episodes on YouTube. So you can just type in Relish or my name, Yia Vang or whatever. And it's all up on there. And then actually myoutdoortv.com, the app,
Mhm.
or the streaming network, or for outdoor, they actually have season 3 on there now too. So all the seasons on there. So you can go stream it all on there. Or they also do the rerun stuff on outdoor too. So you can go check it out on outdoor. And then, yeah, we just say follow us on their social media at Vinai MN. That's Vinai the restaurant, or at Union Hmong Kitchen. And then like my personal one is at Yia Vang 70, and and they're all kind of connected. And so we promote different things that we're doing. And we get to feature different dishes, and then we put little stories up behind it and why we do it. And that's been really fun, and getting people to understand the foods that we do, why we do the foods that we do. So yeah.
Well, I definitely suggest everyone check out the show notes. I'll have all these links in below.
Mhm.
Make sure you go follow them and check all of this out. Before we leave, I had one last question for you, and that's one about legacy.
Mhm.
How do you view your own legacy, your personal, some of the projects that you're
Mhm.
involved with? How is it that you hope that these you know, can continue generationally to
Mhm.
inspire, and the spirit of what your parents did by coming here and the sacrifices they made, and maybe some of those things that you're working on now. How do
Mhm.
you see that interconnectability, and like what is that is it something you think about on a day to day? Is it something that drives you, or is this something that's kind of like you can kind of look back and see as you kind of make these stepping stones in your life where these
Mhm.
paths may lead? Because obviously, even just talking about the
Mhm.
last few months, the things that you didn't know about
Mhm.
the restaurant and about your
Mhm.
name. And so, I mean, there's
Mhm.
things that are always, kind of these truths and these things that are unraveling in the story. But what is it that you think about in that idea of legacy, if you don't mind?
Yeah, for sure. I love movies. I love epic war movies. In the movie Saving Private Ryan, it's been over 20 years, so spoiler alert, right? At the end, where the last scene, you've seen it, the
Oh
last
yeah.
scene where Captain Miller is dying, and Private Ryan is holding him, and knowing that everybody died just to be able to get him to come back, to his family. and Miller kind of looks, at Ryan, and in his dying breath, Ryan pulls Miller in, and Miller, who's played by Tom Hanks, says, earn this," and he whispers in his last breath. And then there's that great scene that then goes back to the first scene, and you realize that the gentleman looking over that grave, that grandfather was actually Miller, or sorry, Ryan, and it wasn't Miller, and he was looking at Miller's grave. And what does he do? He looks at his wife and he says, "Honey, did I live a good life?" And he sees his children, his grandkids, and he goes, "Did I live a good life?" And it's this moment where he just remembers the cost, that his life came at this cost of all these these men who was done with their job, but they came because they had to come find him to get him home. That everyone died so that he could come home. And the question he had to ask himself as an old man coming back to Omaha Beach there, seeing this grave of, Captain John Miller, and he has to ask himself, was I a good man? Did I live a good life? And and I think about that scene a lot because I love it. It's one of my favorite scenes. And I think about when I hear that, I hear in the principle of the voice of Captain John Miller, I hear the voices of my grandfather who never made it to this country, who died in this war, and my uncles who died in the war. I hear them going, "Son, earn this. There are those who've gone before you that died, that only had a hope of what our people could be." I tell you this to tell you that I don't think about legacy for me, but I
Right.
think about their legacy. About 3, 4 years ago, I became an American citizen. I took my citizenship, became an American citizen. A friend of mine, and with all good intentions, said to me, "Yeah, I don't know, man. America's not in the best state. He's a white dude from America, right? Born here." And he's like, "Why would you want to become an American citizen?" Because I was like, "Because you were born a citizen here, you it's a little different for you. You don't know what it's like to be not born a citizen and always feeling like an outsider. But today, I have the ability to go through this process and become a citizen. For the first time, I can say this is my home, right? I'm not doing it because you can pat himself in the back and say, oh, I have a home now. No, no. I'm doing it for my grandpa, who I never got a chance to throw a baseball with, who I never got a chance to grow, never a chance to go fishing with. All my friends had those stories. And he died knowing that one day, fighting in this war, maybe my kids, my grandkids will have a freedom into something better than dying on a freaking side of a mountain somewhere where nobody knew him. You know, though they're the legacy. So I don't think about my legacy. I don't really. I guess in a way, I kind of don't care. I mean, I care, but I don't care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
But what I think about is it's like a ripple, right? When you
yeah.
throw rock in the river or water and there's a ripple. I merely am one of those little ripples, and I hope that I get to push far enough that I can entice another ripple, and then that ripple pushes another and gets another ripple and another ripple, because I know the sacrifices that were made to bring me here. I know the sacrifices that were done so that I could be here, to have a position I have, so that I can read English, so that I can speak English, so that I went to college. I had a 4 year degree. I graduated in high school, college. I am light years ahead of some of my ancestors, some of the people. I am light years ahead. That's all due respect to them. What am I going to do with that? How am I going to earn this? Not like I had to go make it happen. No, no, like this was sacrifice for me. That's what I think about when I think about legacy. I think about their legacy and what I can do to entice, to encourage the next ripple, to encourage the next ripple. That's all we're trying to do. And honestly, man, if it's Lord willing for the next 40, 50 years of just being able to cook food, let's do it. If we get to, if it means like, hey, the Vinai is doing so well that we get to open another different restaurant doing something else, let's do it. If it means that we get to do another different show that gets to highlight some of those echoes, some of those ripples, then let's do it. I'm about that. Life is pretty simple for me. Mark Twain has this quote that says, the two most important day in every person's life is the day they're born and the day they find out why. And for me, the day I found out why, my why for being born is to be able to be one of those little ripples and also entice another little ripple. That's what I'm going to do.
Man, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for joining me, Yia, and all the wonderful things you're putting out in the world, man. You're an inspiration, and I really, really appreciate you just as a human being and all the wonderful things that you've produced and that you get to that we get to see that you've shared out there and the ripples that you continue to expand and put out in the world. So thank you once again. Everyone, make sure you go check out the show notes below. Check out these links. Go check out Vinai and go and enjoy an incredible meal and see what we just spoke about and why this is such a beautiful and sacred place. And once again, man, thank you so much. Looking forward to visiting you in person sometime.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me, bro.
Cheers, man. Well, you take care.